What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Undrunken Podcast. I'm your host, Courtney, and I want you to join me as I talk with real people and have super gritty conversations about their journeys to becoming undrunken. So let's go. Dump the drink because it's time to get this party started. What's up, y'all? It's Nene, and this week I am talking with Chap Grubb, who I met through mountain biking at the Bike Fest here in Seattle. And I really like his story. I think it's super interesting the age he discovered he had a drinking problem and dumped the drink. And so let's jump into Chap's episode. I hope you enjoy his story.
The more organic and raw it is, it sounds like the better. So let's do it.
Yeah, let's just jump in. So, Chap, we met at the Seattle Bike Swap, and like you said, you've got a ton of energy. I think we just picked up on that immediately. And you love the concept of undrunken. And so here we are. Talk to me. You're a non-drinker, and I think you have a phenomenal story.
Oh, wow. Okay. So we met actually just through mountain biking. So the outdoor industry has pretty much always been my passion, and especially like when I came of driving age, because that's what really unlocked all those doors. And I bring that up because it ties into, and I'm trying to get more accustomed to Courtney's framing of undrunken. I've always referred to it as sobriety, even though I personally am not what people would call traditionally sober. I live in Washington State where recreational marijuana is legal, and I participate in that activity. However, my relationship with alcohol, I ended 12 years ago when I was 19 years old. And there's a lot of story around that, and I'm sure we'll dive in and dig deeper. But that is very unusual for people to have started and stopped drinking at an age at 19. I was in college when I stopped, and I almost there's three reasons I was able to do it. A, just a ton of love, support, and understanding from my family. Two, unbelievably, even though I had moved into a house with 8 other guys that was effectively our own fraternity house, even though none of us were in frats, those 8 guys, like, were unbelievably respectful and compassionate and believing, even though that was such a surprise and pretty unusual that I ended up staying in that house the whole time. And then lastly, it was the outdoor industry, and it was the climbers and the skiers and the snowboarders that I met that were more working professionals than college students, and were able to go on experiences and adventures and trips with them that made my sobriety, though young at a party school like Boulder, possible. So that's like the best place, I guess, to start, Courtney.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
We can kind of go from, I don't know, what are you thinking about? What kind of questions does that prompt for you?
Well, the first thing that I think, and I think a lot of people listening will think is, okay, so you started and stopped before you were even legal drinking age. So when did you start?
Well, it's a bit of a trick question. I mean, so my dad has been sober 30, like, long time. He sobered up when I was a kid, and maybe 20, 25 years, somewhere in that ballpark, long time. There was never booze in my house, right? Like, my mom never had a problem, but just as my dad was sobering up, it wasn't important to her, so she stopped. So there was just never alcohol in my house. So it wasn't like I was really super young pilfering it from my folks. I remember maybe my first real experience drinking was I was maybe like 16, 15, something like that. And my dad, through like a work promotion, had gotten like a 6-pack or a bottle of wine or something. And I went and snagged, 3 beers or a couple of drinks and felt lightheaded. And that was like my first experience. Then, when I was a senior in high school and a freshman in college, like we drank. When I was in high school, hard to have a problem because you can't get that much booze, right? Like there's literally just, oh, you and your six buddies find a way to get a 30 rack and a fifth, and you split that between six people. Hard to have a drinking problem, right? Because you run out. It was my freshman year of college when I was 19 that, that unlimited booze and really showed how, even despite my best efforts, I was not very good at drinking. That's the way I always described it to people. I just wasn't good at it. I would start drinking and then 90 minutes later I'd be blackout drunk and somebody'd be carrying me home. It wasn't fun for me. It wasn't fun for my friends. Like nobody had a good time drinking with me, myself included. And I'm so naturally social that helped so much because I could go to college parties and make friends and BS with people and laugh and have a good time without the booze. And that made a pretty significant difference in my capacity to stop drinking at that age.
What were some of the challenges of giving up alcohol at 19 in college?
I think, fortunately, it wasn't hard because I was already passionate about it, but it was hard having to essentially start over again at the beginning. Because, Courtney, here real quick, like, I got to college in August of 2010. That was 2014 is when I graduated from college. Got to the summer of 2010. Immediately the first week I was in Boulder, I got a minor in possession and spent the night in detox. That was like the first week. Literally the last week of freshman year, I got another minor in possession and spent another night in detox. Mind you, 0.28, 0.3 blood alcohol level both times, like should have probably died. I was not okay. It wasn't like some kid going a little bit crazy. It was like pushing death amounts of alcohol, really irresponsible and zero self-control. And then it was my first week of sophomore year and I got my third MIP and I woke up in detox for the third time with essentially the same thing happening. And I was like, all right, this might not be the pathway for me moving forwards. Like, if this is going to keep happening, like, we got to do something different. And I remember distinctively, Courtney, the third night, I went into that night saying, I'm just going to have a couple beers. Right? Like, that was the mindset I went into that night with. And then I woke up in the same situation and I was like, all right, dude, like let's figure this out before this gets way worse, right? Because a couple misdemeanors and failing out of freshman year of college, pretty recoverable, right? Like those are pretty recoverable consequences that weren't soul crushing and devastating, like losing your family or committing vehicular manslaughter. So like it was an opportunity for me to sit in detox while I was waiting to blow zeros and go, all right, like fix this. And fortunately for me, the answer was yes. And we can take the steps and make it better. I mean, I spent the rest of college in trouble, struggling to get my grade point average up, finalizing my degree, and I managed to graduate with a major and minors in 4 years through a lot of extra work and summer classes. And like me failing out of the day school at CU and them sending me to night school my sophomore year of college, I mean, it was maybe the best thing that ever happened to me for a lot of different reasons.
I mean, I don't think you could have done that had you been drinking.
No, absolutely no way. I couldn't do anything when I was drinking. I was useless for days at a time.
Did you get I mean, you were blacking out drinking. Were the hangovers just completely debilitating as well? Or were you just
Oh,
tacking it right back on? Like,
so first of all, it's been a long time. It's been like 12 years since any of this is something I thought that much about. What I remember was it was not like every day. I was a
Mhm.
19-year-old boy, so I could recover quickly, and I was physically a lot less impacted
Mhm.
than an older person would have been consuming that amount of alcohol. But I would just say it was like once or twice a week on the weekends that I would start drinking and just go that big,
Mhm.
right? It was more, it was less about it being an everyday occurrence and more about a pure self control, self regulation problem. Like, isn't it Blake Shelton that sings a song about like having one more? One, isn't that like one drink leads to another drink leads to another drink? There's like a country song that's like that. And that's what it always felt like to me,
Yeah.
right? Is it was like I started it and I wasn't stopping drinking until I didn't know what was going on anymore. Right? That like it
Yeah.
was never did I sit down with my friends and have 3 beers over
Right.
dinner.
It just goes and goes and goes until it stops flowing.
Absolutely. And so, you know, the hangover, like I just remember, I mean, shit, the most memorable thing for me was those 3 nights that I spent in detox was, I mean, I didn't blow zeros and I wasn't allowed to make phone calls until 7 p.m. the next day.
Wow.
Right? So whatever I wasn't getting hungover because I was still silly drunk. I mean, I probably woke up blowing above the legal driving limit,
Yeah.
right? Like, so, you know, hangovers are hard to remember 12 years later, but what I do know is that it was just self-control
Mhm.
on a night to night basis versus like I'm drinking 2 bottles of wine every night no
Right.
matter what. It was more bingey. It was bingey. That's kind of the classical definition that it comes into.
Yeah. What, so, okay, we talked about the challenges. What about the joys? Like what,
Mm,
I mean, you talked about having amazing support from your family and your friends and your living situation,
yeah.
which I think is just so awesome, right? Like,
Yeah.
what were some of the joys that you experienced by dumping the drink?
Oh my gosh. Well, so I'll give one really serious example, and then I'll give two small kind of anecdotally just awesome, some of my favorite moments. So right after I stopped drinking, I was 19 years old. I was at CU Boulder. I'd pretty much spent my freshman year partying, right? Like I'd gone out and I'd gone skiing a couple times. I'd been climbing a couple times, but the whole reason I went to Boulder was to ski and climb. That's like why I wanted to be in the Front Range of Colorado. And I barely did it my freshman year. And so the biggest joy that I have, a meaningful way, is the moment I got sober, I got inspired to go to the climbing gym, to join the climbing club, to go on the climbing trips, and to like go for 4 days at a time instead of screwing around with my idiot friends. And to like go on road trips and like I was lucky and talk about support. One of the maybe the best thing that the most meaningful thing that happened was that first year of sobriety, my parents offered to pay for my gas to go on trips, right? So that I could leave Boulder. So I wasn't stuck there over the weekend. They were like, hey, if you want to go to Wyoming to go rock climbing, we got you, right?
Mhm.
So that made such a big difference in being able to go get outside and like really attack what I was truly passionate about versus the easy option of partying with my idiot friends on the weekend. The the two small moments that I referenced earlier. One of my greatest pleasures in life is going to college or like parties, aggressive parties, and late at night, and me bringing hot black coffee in a coffee mug and having people ask me what I was drinking, and I would offer it to them without telling them what it was, and watching a bunch of drunk people at midnight drinking hot black coffee is literally one of the funniest things you've ever seen. And because I was sober, I remember every single time I ever did it and the absolute shock and surprise. The other great joy of my sobriety was when my friends that did drink wanted to go on a climbing trip with me, especially my two roommates. I loved being the first one up and making them wake up to hardcore gangster rap like Biggie or NWA at full volume at 5:30 in the morning. So those two fun little factors of my sobriety brought me countless hours of joy and amusement over my years of being a young sober adult.
I love this. I love this. Chap, you
Yeah.
talked about like, and this is just, I'm really loving that consistently I talk to people, and when they dump the drink, they become more active, right? Like that energy. And you talked about the passion, like following your true passion versus just like, well, this is easy and everybody's doing it. What did that feel like? Because I feel like that's not the norm.
You know, so I guess let's back up, Courtney, and let me answer a little bit of a different question, and then I'll get to this. I think there's a really important part of my history that made what I did possible and like really informed and reasonable. Like a lot of people I've talked to through my sobriety have been like, wow, it sounds had it really easy. And I think in a lot of ways I did have it really easy. But the reason I was able to make it so easy on myself is literally, and I think Courtney, we talked about this off camera, one moment, one conversation I had with my parents. My dad has been sober 20 to 30 years. I don't actually, embarrassingly, don't know how long, but somewhere in that ballpark. And my family has a pretty severe history of addiction in general, whether it's alcohol or cocaine or any number of other addictive drugs. And so when I was young, like 13 or 14, before I really started getting my hands in the mix of all of these different things, or before I even started getting offered it, my parents sat me down and they said in a very respectful and compassionate and understanding way, hey, we know you're a kid, we know you're adventurous, and we know you're going to try things. We want you to try things. We want you to have those experiences. We don't want to put any roadblocks on you. However, be aware this history and be aware that your body chemistry, your genetics, your family history indicates that addiction is something that you're likely going to have to wrestle with. You might get lucky and it might not be, but just know this about yourself. So that was, a full 7 years before I got sober. So I mentioned when I was talking about waking up in the drunk tank and spending that time waiting to blow zeros, that's what I was thinking about. I was like, oh, the addiction, the inability to control yourself, the triggers that my parents referenced so many years ago. And then after all of that thought, I thought to myself, like, do you even need to drink? Is it fun for you? And the answer was like a resounding no. And it seemed like a no-brainer. And I literally left that detox. That was August 26, 2011. And that was it. There was no regression. And I'm so lucky that I was so young that like, I don't think about it, right? I'm not tempted. I'm opening a a little snack bar convenience stand with a bunch of beer here up at the ReRouted shop in the next couple of weeks, and I'm not at all worried about it because I'm not interested even remotely, right? Like somebody asked me the other day, actually, Courtney, they're like, would you ever go back to it? Like, do you feel like you could control yourself better? And I was like, even if I could, to to what purpose? Like, what is it gonna change about my life? Like, is it gonna make any piece of this better? No. Like, I'm good. So so that history is really important because you had asked like process wise, right? I kind of feel like I lost my train of thought on your original question. Can you refresh
I
my
just,
memory?
that's okay because I've got 10 different directions I want to go now, including like one, I think it's like something that's really cool and I think is a blessing in all of this is you never got to a point where you were like, oh, I really like this, right? Like for me,
Yeah.
I could tell you if there was a way to drink wine and martinis without alcohol, hook me the fuck up. That stuff is so good. I'm in
Yeah.
process right now of selling this beautiful wine collection I have. I have 13 bottles of wine. Not one of them is worth less than $50. And as I'm like setting them up and taking pictures, I'm like, oh, my mouth watered a little
Yeah.
because I developed a taste for it. And you never like you didn't go through that. So like giving up, okay, so it's August, you go through
Yeah.
this detox tank thing. Did you like that was it? Was there anything like did you need anything? Did you need any help? Like what were there resources that you needed or were
Yeah.
you just done?
So I had a long-term girlfriend at the time, and she was very initially supportive. Like, there were a lot of problems with me drinking. It really impacted her negatively as well as everybody around me. Of course, obviously. So she was super supportive of me stopping drinking. However, because she was also a teenager and not willing to give up drinking, created a bunch of conflict. But that's a different story for maybe later in the podcast or another podcast. Uh, um, but the support that I really sought was twofold. My dad came out that weekend to pick me up from detox, and he was there and bought me a pair of hiking boots and was like, dude, like let's get this figured out, and like I get it, I know what this feels like, let's go for it, right? And that was the hiking boots and the gas money. That's where that offer came in, and that was that weekend, right? And I knew both of those. I guess not the hiking boots probably, but the gas money deal goes away if I start drinking again, right?
Right.
Like that deal's off the table because the whole point of it is to get me out of Dodge so I can not participate in those
So
parties.
you can live life, not drink it away.
Yep, totally. And so my girlfriend and I at the time, we did go to like a local AA meeting. We probably did it that following week or maybe 2 weeks after my decision to stop drinking. And that particular experience was horrifying to be in as a 19-year-old, right? Like, everything, everybody that was in there, it was really overwhelming and really scary and really anxiety driving to the point that I could tell at that stage of my life was not going to be a good thing, right? Like it was too much. I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't mature enough to be able to handle that engagement and that interaction without it scaring me too much. And so I found Phoenix Multisport, which I believe is still very much in action. I was able to go to a bunch of those different outdoor gatherings. Like I said, I had really supportive friends, but I also worked really, really hard to establish a new set of friends that had never seen me drink. So it doesn't like, I guess that's not really support related, but it makes such a big difference when the people around you
It's
don't
consistent.
don't have that expectation of you, and that shift hasn't happened. It's just like, oh yeah, I'm Chap, I don't drink. And everybody in my life now pretty much has not really ever seen me intoxicated. And then the last kind of support that, I sought besides Phoenix and AA was a lot. There was actually, shockingly and reflective, looking back on it, a pretty remarkable amount of support and work that both the school and the city system did on my behalf. And, as a 19-year-old teenager, having to go to 10 hours of court mandated lectures and talks about drugs and alcohol with, 10 other people that were in the same position felt really stupid. And like having to write the essays and doing all of that crap that the school had me do, I hated it when I was 19. But like, it really allowed me a lot of room to take it head on, to own it, to understand it, and to communicate about it in a significant and meaningful way with a lot of people who wanted to see me be successful. And I was fortunate because I'd been doing those classes for a long time before I made the decision, because I had the previous issues. Like I'd done a bunch of this stuff before. So I'd already been thinking, I've been really exposed to it. And like I said, I was so lucky that I had really supportive friends. They didn't push back on me at all. I remember sitting these 19-year-old boys that were drinking handles and kegs in the house every weekend down the first week of sophomore year, the first week we lived together, Courtney. And I said, hey, I decided for my sake, I don't want to drink anymore. And they go, great, we got you. No problem. Right? Wild. There was no kickback. Nobody made fun of me. Nobody teased me. It was never pressure. In fact, because I was always gone on climbing trips, whenever I happened to be there for one of the house parties, I literally would get cheered. Like they would get the entire house party, like, Jap's here, and it was awesome. Like I love those kids to death. They're still some of my absolute best friends in the whole world. Is that like group of 8 to 12 dudes that were there for me, like right when that happened. And they're the only ones that still tell stories of me when I was drinking. They're the only ones that still remember and reflect. I make sure to keep them away from my life.
Well, I mean, okay. So we're talking about, when you quit drinking, right? Your friends change. They just do, right? Like you just have different things in common, and I also think there's an intentionality that starts to grow with the people you surround yourself with when you're not inebriated.
Totally.
You mentioned that your girlfriend at the time wouldn't give up alcohol, so I don't know, like unpack that part a little bit for me, as far as like,
okay,
was there a lot of shifts in friends? Was it just her? Like,
so I would say I'm super close with those guys from that house now. During college, we weren't. Like, they were awesome that year that I lived with them, but once we moved out of that house, like, I saw him every now and then, and we were on good terms, but we were not close because
Yeah.
I wasn't going to their parties and I wasn't drinking with them all the time. So like, and that was fine. So I would say literally everybody, all of my friends shifted, except for my buddy, and I'm happy to name him Jeremy Wicker. He's still one of my best and closest friends. He was one of the best men at our wedding. And Jeremy was one of my freshman year, like, flatmates. He was right there. He was one of the dudes that was carrying me home all the time. But when I said I was going to sober up and I started climbing, I reached out to him to ask him if he wanted to go climbing with me. And he did. And he decided that he was going to go climbing with me anytime I ever asked. And that when he was doing that, he, wasn't going to drink, just to be supportive. And he's still one of my absolute best friends to this day. My girlfriend and I, we made it about another year after I got sober. She was the head of the concert thing, like the concert planning committee at CU Boulder. She was like the head cheerleader kind of girl, kind of party girl sort of thing. So like, I never asked or expected her to stop drinking. Really, the conflict wasn't even like one or the other. It wasn't me telling her to stop or whatever. Just that it's so fucking awkward, Courtney.
Yeah.
Like, it's just weird, right?
Yeah.
And like, when one person's sober and the other person's not, shit just gets weird. It gets confusing and it gets complicated. And like, it just wasn't going to work. There was a bunch of other things going on that were adjacent to that,
Yeah.
but I would definitely contribute alcohol, my sobriety or my undrunkenness, to be a pretty serious factor in the outcome of that relationship. So much so, Courtney, that any of my romantic partners that I met afterwards, I was super clear, like that first week. Hey, I don't care that you drink. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't tempt me. I have no issue with it. I'm never going to ask you to get sober for my sake. That said, it's going to be weird. It's going to be hard no matter what we do. It's going to be complicated and we're going to have to talk about stuff because it makes people feel uncomfortable. And like the one that gets me, because I truly couldn't care less if people want to drink. If people enjoy it and are good at drinking, great, good for them. I'm just not good at it. And so like, I have no judgment for anybody that wants to do it. But so often, men and women will accuse a sober person of being judgmental because of guilt and things that they feel.
Their own shit. Well, okay, so
yeah,
with the dating thing though, right? Like,
yeah,
for me, I think it's about connection, right? Like, I don't know that I would even go out on a date with somebody that drinks. It's just, it's not interesting to me. Like, I have friends that drink and like you, no judgment. Like, if it works for you, it works for you. But if I'm going to be intimate with somebody and like, there's such a depth of connection that I want, I just don't think it's possible if somebody is poisoning their consciousness like that. Like,
totally.
And again, no judgment, just not interested.
I totally get it. And I mean, shit, like, one of the best things about being sober is you get to leave whenever you want, right? It was like
usually about 8 p.m.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's always a moment at like a night's activities where you're like, oh cool, this is no longer fun, right?
The palpable shift in the air as everyone else there starts like getting the glaze over the eyes.
The telltale trigger to me is when I hear one person tell me the same thing twice. I'm like, we're repeating ourselves now. I think it's time for me to Yeah, I think it's time for me to get on out of here. Thank you, though. But yeah, no, and I over the years have been lucky enough to make a bunch of sober friends.
Yeah.
And I've made a bunch of friends that also drink. And I think that for me, and I agree about some of the intimacy things. I think it depends. I obviously wouldn't want to be with somebody in a relationship that, 3 hours to 6 hours out of the day, we're not able to connect even a little bit. Right? Like, then somebody that, like years wants to go drink a little bit too much, like, okay, great, it's New Year's, right? Like, whatever, I don't care, it's fine. But I think for me it's more about like what's important, right?
Yeah.
Like what's
Yeah.
important to the person that I'm in a relationship with, and if that's not like, as long as it's not the number one priority, like I'm pretty flexible. And Courtney, unlike you, I stopped when I was really young, and I
Yeah.
have no connection
Yeah.
with it anymore. Like if somebody were to ask me like what's beer taste like, I was like, I can tell you what those zero Heinekens taste like. I can tell you what some of those
Yeah.
athletic brews taste like.
I
But
love athletic brew. Yeah.
they're the best. Oh, yeah. We'll link that up. But the whole time I was drinking, my entire career of drinking, I was with that one girl. From when I started to when I stopped, I was with the same girl. So I never had any experiences romantically with alcohol besides with that one woman. Um, but yeah, I mean, I am totally, I get it. And it's
Yeah.
just, like I said, to me, connection and priority,
Yeah.
that's really what's important. And I'm so lucky that my personal relationship with booze is so far distant
Yeah.
that like it, the, I don't like seeing my friends make bad choices. That's really the thing. My friends and the people that I care about and love make bad decisions.
Yeah.
That's the hardest thing for me because I care about them and I want them to be successful. I mean, my college buddies were the luckiest dudes ever because I always picked them up. I always was their DD.
Right? I love that.
I,
So,
I
okay.
I left a kid in jail overnight for drunk driving one night because he called me to come pick him up from jail. And I was like, "You drunk drive, you idiot?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "You didn't call me." I was like, "That seems like a you problem. Like, you get to spend the night in jail and I'll come pick your ass up in the morning because the rule was call me because you
Right.
don't have any
Don't drive.
you don't have any excuse. You have a sober
Yeah.
friend that is always willing to come get you." Sorry, I interrupted you to tell that.
Oh, no, that's like, yeah, I'm right there with you. Although I will say, in my 20s, I've always taken these breaks and stuff, and it was only this most recent one where I was like, nope, I'm done. But I remember in my 20s not drinking, and I loved it because I got to drive all my friends like hot cars. Like my one friend had this Cadillac that was just like, you hit the gas at 70 on the freeway, it's still throwing you back in your seat. It was like a Batmobile. And I
That's
loved
awesome.
it, but man, he and his girlfriend and buddies would be like drunk and like wrestling in the car, and I'm like, you guys are yahoos, like yahoos right now. But like yeah, it was super fun. Okay, so like you, I still am very social, right?
Mhm.
I go out. It does not bother me to be around alcohol or people drinking. It doesn't bother me to be around drunk people until that, you know,
Yeah, the
third
trigger.
time I've heard this story.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
what do you like? How do you navigate those events? Like, what do you drink? Do people talk to you about it? Like, what's it like?
Uh, so I treat my sobriety very much how I treat the fact that I'm a vegan. I don't ever bring it up unless somebody asks, right? I take care of it myself. I order the drinks and the food that I want to drink and eat, and I won't say the word vegan in a restaurant. So I treat my undrunkenness very similarly, where I won't bring it up. Usually I like every now and then I like a non-alcoholic beer or drink. Most of the time I'm either drinking coffee or Coke. I love caffeine and I
Mm,
love a Coke and I love coffee. So I'll drink that 24 hours a day. Caffeine doesn't caffeine does not keep me up at night, so I will drink it whenever I want. So I'm usually drinking one of those things. I usually, like we've been talking about, have a time that
yeah.
I always make sure I'm able to leave early. I don't carpool with people, right?
Yeah.
Like I will drive people if they're ready to go when I'm ready to go. But I don't want to be stuck hanging around with anybody. And so like I make sure I have the freedom to go when I want to go. And then the last the last maybe this is a little bit rude and maybe a bit arrogant, but it's like the whole thing where it's like with public speaking and imagining everybody in their underwear, you're you're the smartest person in the room. Like you don't have anything to worry about, right? There's like nothing to be weird or ashamed of. Like you're the smartest person in the room. Like no, and nobody's fucking paying attention to you.
No.
Nobody's gonna remember. Nobody's gonna know. I There are a bunch of kids that I like would go hang out with in college, Courtney, that straight up didn't know I didn't drink. Right? We'd be like friends for months and months and months and months,
Yep.
and they'd be like, "Wait, you don't drink?
Yeah.
No, never. Wait, really? You haven't been drinking with us? No."
You're like, I am a ball of fun, el natural. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I remember I was at Oktoberfest long after I'd been sober, and I was at Oktoberfest up here in Leavenworth actually, and we were just talking to some random people that we met, and like I brought back a bunch of drinks for everybody and handed everybody something. And they're like, "What'd you get?" I was like, "Oh, a Coke." And they're like, "Wait, you don't have a drink?" I was like, "No, I haven't drank at all night or in years." And they're
Yeah.
like, "What? Like, how are you this outgoing and social?" Like, I don't know. It
I
is
think a
that
lot
way.
of people depend on it. That's what do they call it? Social lubricant,
Oh,
liquid courage.
absolutely. I mean,
Yeah.
shit, Courtney, one of those girls from the college house when I was 19 came in, told her I didn't drink. She straight up, in all seriousness, asked me what I did for fun. And I was just like, oh, girl, like that's not good. Right? What do you mean? What do I do for fun? Like, we're 19 years old and there's literally a billion things to do.
There are
Literally,
not enough hours in the day for all the fun I want to do.
yeah, there's 100 million other things that you could do other than drink. Like, what an insane fucking question. But that out to me. I will never forget that girl looking at me. I remember exactly what she looks like. And I remember her earnestly asking me that question. And I just looked to my friend and I was like, dude, I don't even know what to say to that.
It is an extremely popular misconception that people who don't drink are boring, even by some of us that don't drink.
It's true. It is true. It's just such a common expectation of the society with which we live in that alcohol is a part of everything that we do. And it's a wild misconception. And
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, a, a, a lot of the people that I know that are sober, their stories, and I'm sure you know this talking to a bunch of people, their stories remind me a lot of when George Costanza and Seinfeld stopped having sex and he got really smart, right? Like all of that energy and uh, mental bandwidth and capacity that went towards drinking, or in George Costanza's case, sex, then gets reallocated to things that are
Yeah.
more productive and fun, and that pursue the passions that matter to us. And I think that it's hard to find a sober person that's boring, because they had a lot of extra energy that now got delegated to something that matters to them a lot.
There you go. New goal. Find a boring sober person.
I don't know. I don't know if you'll find one. That's a tough
No.
one.
No, but I will say, like, there's a handful of people who, even before I've interviewed them, they're like, well, I just don't think my story's that interesting. And I'm like, actually, and some people, it's like, I never drank, just was never interested. I
Yeah.
tried it once. And I'm like, that is like incredibly interesting to somebody who I love the taste of alcohol. Love it.
Yeah.
Don't like getting drunk though.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine only doing something once. There's a reason. This is on Drunkenness podcast. I can discuss kind of all the rest of it too. I think I never done cocaine because of all of my worries about addiction. I'm almost positive that if I tried coke one time,
Yeah.
that's game over for me. Literally, the rest of my life, every bit of energy I have is going to be thinking about trying to get that next line of coke, because that's that sort of stimulant is, I love everything
Yeah.
about stimulants, and so I've just never tried it. I've been offered it countless times,
Right.
but I know that if I do it one time, well, then it's game over.
Right. Yeah. It it's
One
our
time, I can't imagine.
it's that same energy though that gets you doing all the other stuff, right? The climbing and yeah, for
Well,
sure.
I mean, I'm ADHD as they come, and I would say in almost every aspect of my life, I've considered it a superpower. And in almost every facet, I've been able to channel it and hone it and manage it. College was the only time where I ever consistently took Adderall, because college is not designed for people with ADHD, especially when you're playing catch up, trying to make up
Yeah.
a whole year and a half of course load that you failed out of. Like, there was no way. So that was the only time I routinely took Adderall that was prescribed to me.
With
And
the
then I
focus.
stopped taking it immediately after I graduated, and I haven't taken it since then.
I love
Um,
that you describe ADHD as a superpower because I totally feel the same way.
yeah,
And I'm, you know, I coach youth mountain biking and
yeah,
I'm around a lot of kids and there was a young man who was really struggling with it. And I was like, look, it's hard because you don't fit in the box. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. It's a superpower. You just, but I also feel the same way about undrunkenness.
yeah.
It's a superpower. I think it was my friend Ryan. He's like, I am Captain Undrunken. And I'm like, I love that because it's true, right? Like everybody else is like kind of going onto this different plane and you're like, I got it. I got it.
I need to see the meme, the Captain Morgan meme, but with somebody that's undrunken representing the Captain
Yes.
Morgan.
Yes.
I gotta see it. I can see it in my mind's eye.
It's gonna be my first shirt. That's it right
Yes,
there.
I love it. That's
The first
fabulous.
undrunken shirt, Captain
I,
Undrunken.
That's so spectacular. And, I think that reflects back a lot, Courtney, on what we were talking about being the smartest person in the room, right? Is
Right.
like, like I said, that's a pretty rude and arrogant way to think about it. But if you're feeling like socially anxious about being the only sober person in the room, like, freaking remember that nobody else cares and nobody else is
You're the
paying it.
most present.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're definitely the most clear-minded. You're certainly the only one that has the power to get behind the wheel of a car safely. I could keep going.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
arrogant, rude, maybe. Also like a superpower.
It's definitely, well, I would say, especially based on my story, it's become a pretty big point of pride for me. Like I said, I don't bring it up unless
Right.
people talk about it, because like it just doesn't doesn't matter if people don't want to know. I don't need to push my views on anybody.
There's
But
something weird. Like, I kind of feel like I understand what you're saying, because like there's some weird little joy that I get out of people being surprised that I don't drink.
mhm,
They're like,
totally.
"Wait, you don't drink?" And I'm like, "No." And they're like, "Wait, you don't drink?" Like, it just
It
like
it goes back to your boring comment. It goes back to your boring comment when people are like, "Huh, cool," right?
oh my God, there is
now
nothing cool about drinking. I mean, what slurring, falling down,
yeah,
mascara running drunk girl is cool? None of
not
them.
yeah, it's not very flattering.
No,
It's not flattering for
no,
anybody,
it's not. It's not.
but like when I guess like young, hip, charismatic, high energy people are not drinking,
Yeah,
it's always a surprise
it is.
because it's just not expected. And
It's
so,
society, our culture has marketed it that way. And
oh
but
yeah.
they also, you know what, Chap, and I've talked about this numerous times. They did the same fucking thing with cigarettes. And like now, if you smoke, it's like you're like a pariah. They're like, people are like, "Ew, get away, you stink!"
the
Like
the the
25
ant
feet from the door.
the anti-smoking campaigns, man, like whoever put together those has done remarkable work. And I mean, shit, I'm 2 years 2 years off the cigarettes. I don't know if you all watching the video can see, but I sneak puffs of my vape still, so I still am pretty addicted to nicotine. But I quit cigarettes 2 years ago, and it was mostly for the little guy that I keep poking my head on, who is turning 2 here on the 26th in about a week and a half. But I quit New Year's before he was born because
Yeah.
I didn't want that to impact him. Um, but yeah, like it is advertising around alcohol. And I would even say, like, I've been in the business startup entrepreneurship world, and it's super unusual that I don't drink. And when I go out to events, it's super unusual. And it's one of the reasons that I like don't bring it up. I just don't draw attention to it. And also, Courtney, I played poker professionally for a long time. And I would say that my sobriety was like the best part of like the thing that made me the best. Well, it gave me one of the biggest edges.
Again, it's a superpower right there.
I I always bought the table drinks. Always. Right? Like always.
Okay, you're gonna love this. I'm gonna tell you a story. So when I was in my 20s, I did this like social experiment where I didn't drink for a year, but I didn't tell anybody. So I always had a fake drink. And I would literally, Chap, you're gonna love this. I would go buy everybody a round of shots, and the bartender would give me a shot of water. So I would come back and do shots with everybody the whole time drinking water. Like, oh, so
Amazing. You
evil.
you and I have a similar sense of humor. I think we're entertained by things like that. It always cracks me up to mess with drunk
You got to
people.
look
And
out for us.
oh yeah, totally. So like that point in the party where it's time to leave, I always make sure to take 5 to 10 minutes just to implement a little a little amusement on my behalf. Right? There's like a threshold where you can always make something entertaining happen for a good memory to stick on for yourself.
I love it. Chap, I'd love to do quick fire with you.
Yeah, bring it.
So, a sentence or two on how being undrunken has affected these key areas in your wheel of life. I will prompt
Okay.
you. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. How has being undrunken affected work?
Oh, I mean, if I was still drinking now, uh, I would 100% be on a construction crew somewhere instead of being an entrepreneur that's raised capital and played poker professionally and done all the cool stuff that I've done. There's no doubt in my mind I would be there.
How has being undrunken affected money?
That's a bit of a trick question because I'm a gambler and an entrepreneur. So money is always was going to be tough based on those decisions to gamble and to start up my own business. But I would say I'd be in a really similar situation financially. However, my prospects would be far less promising.
A
Maybe
lot less to show for it.
Yeah, is maybe the way I'd frame it is like, we're building a startup right now, and so it's money's money and always working hard to keep everything afloat. But if I was still drinking, like I wouldn't have done anything with my existence so far besides hang out with my buddies and get drunk. Shit, I
Earn a
probably wouldn't even have
paycheck
it.
and spend it on alcohol.
I probably wouldn't be married. I probably wouldn't have a 2-year-old. Like, yeah, no.
How has being undrunken affected love life? Does your wife drink?
She does. It's definitely added complexity because I'm not stubborn about finding I was not stubborn about finding a purely sober partner. It made being a lot younger and having relationships way more challenging than it has in my adult life. But building those connections with younger people that remind me a lot of that girl that say, what do you do for fun? That was definitely challenging. And I typically found myself with older partners as an outcome of that in a number of different ways. Just like I typically I was more mature than most of my friends for a lot of obvious reasons. And so I found myself in that position a lot. And, my wife's a couple years older than me.
How's being undrunken affected family?
Oh, it's been amazing. Like my parents and I are so close. I'm so close with my kid. I love always being present and available for him, always being able to respond and react if anything was needed. It is a superpower, as we've said over and over again during this podcast. And I think that the fact that I'm always sober and available and ready to go is one of the best things that I could ever do for Archer. And the fact that he'll spend his whole life seeing me at my best all the time, I think is really powerful.
How has being undrunken affected friends?
You get a lot deeper connection with people when you have long, deep, intelligent conversations versus the surface stuff that happens over music. And I think that not involving alcohol forces you to connect in a more meaningful way.
How has being undrunken affected spirituality?
I was never super religious or spiritual. I don't know how much my drinking or non-drinking has been super relevant. I've read all of the works. Like I've read the Quran, I've read the Old and the New Testament. I'm super educated on religion, but I think if anything, I have a little bit of a hard time with like the canonical religion tied to alcoholism and AA in general. Like it's weird for me, and I don't quite make that connection. And that's one of the other reasons I didn't relate strongly to AA is I I believe in the power of karma and good choices and good energy receiving good things on the other end. And you want to do your best to be the best person you can be at every decision. And I think that in terms of that belief, being undrunken, it makes that just way easier when you have ultimate control over what you're doing versus the nonsense that I did when I was really, really drunk.
I feel like that kind of answers the last spoke, is how has being undrunken affected self?
I mean, I would literally never, there's nothing that could be done to change that decision, right? Like, look, if somebody offered me $1 million for my business, if I drank 5 shots of whiskey, I would 100% drink 5 shots of whiskey and never drink ever again in over the rest of my life. It would be the same thing if somebody asked me to, here's $1 million for eating this bowl of cow manure. I don't know. That was just the first example that
Well,
came to
you're
my head.
vegan, so here's some bacon, right?
Yes, yeah, right. But like, the 3 best decisions that I've ever made, it's arguably, if I were to identify myself to somebody, it'd be in the top 5 like aspects of who I am and why I think the way I do. I mean, it's been a completely governing factor of the last 12 years of my life. So much so that I tell people that my real birthday doesn't fucking matter. The sobriety birthday is the only, like, that's the one I want people to remember, because me being born doesn't count for shit. Me making the decision to stop drinking made me who I am today.
Can I re-summarize that in a really
please.
cool way? Me being born doesn't matter. Me choosing to live makes everything.
Bingo. I think we have to end now. I don't think we can keep going. That's like the whole.
Well, so where can we find you?
Oh boy.
Instagram.
All over the place. So I'm on TikTok. I'm on Instagram.
And you're a business owner.
Yeah. So the business that I founded and run, and I'm the CEO of, is called ReRouted. It's a secondhand online gear store. We have a physical store here in Gold Bar, Washington as well, but it's a national marketplace building technology to make marketplaces easier. You can find ReRouted at www.rerouted.co, ReRouted.co. It's also ReRouted Co on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're all across the board on ReRouted.co. You can find me personally on TikTok at Dad Venture Time, I believe. I think there's an underscore between. Courtney, I'll send you all the specs too. I'll send them all to you in an email, so maybe we can put them in the show notes. But
absolutely,
personally, TikTok, Dad Venture Time for Chap. I believe my personal Instagram is climbing.grubs. And then my most used form of social media is LinkedIn, and Chapman Grubb on LinkedIn is extremely easy to find. And I post frequently from like a business insight perspective and life perspective, and about being a dad and all sorts of fun stuff. So
I love it. I love it. Chap, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Courtney. This has been really fun. I don't get to vent or talk about this very often, so it was really fun to revisit all of this and to think about it in a new way.
Thank you so much for joining me. I look forward to sharing more with you as we continue to explore being undrunken together with friends. I hope the Undrunken Podcast is helpful and inspiring to all of you out there. So if you liked this episode, please send it to a friend and help share these stories with more people.